Let's revisit the black point conversation on BenQ SW display using Palette Master Element. This is ArtIsRight. Before we start, subscribe if you're new and hit on the bell icon so you'll be notified every time I upload cool new videos like this. I have released a video on this already. However, in the past few versions for Palette Master Element, there is some changes to the way how you would choose a black point on the display. Before we get to that, I want to quickly point out the black level chart that I'm using. This is the one that I have created. I'll leave a link for you to download in the description below. What you would simply do is use the preview built into macOS, or what you can simply do is open this black level chart in any image editing program or any preview program that you're using, and you should be able to see the black tonal scaling on your display. This is a helpful tool not only just for BenQ SW display, but pretty much you can use this on any other display. And quickly to go over the setup, I have two SW display here, SW271C and the SW271. Pretty much these are both 27-inch 4K hardware calibrated display, and they are linked up to my Mac Mini M1. I'm using this SW271 as the benchmark with one singular calibration value, and this one I have gone in and varied the value for the black point calibration quite a bit, so we're going to see the way how that looks. But let me give you some quick context and background. With Palette Master Element up to version 1.3.11, you would go in and choose between either absolute black or relative. That is the only two options that you have. With a lot of testing, I have always recommended that anyone calibrating their display choose relative black, because that is going to give you a much better black tonal scaling and is also going to give you the ability to differentiate the lower black values on your display much better than absolute black. When you go in and calibrate the display using absolute black, it has a tendency to crush a lot of the lower black tones. That is pretty much the values that you see in the first row here, so that you can't differentiate them between zero anymore. And that is not an ideal situation that you want to be in when you're doing color critical work. So with Palette Master Element 1.3.12 going on forward, you still have the option for absolute black, and absolute black still has a tendency to crush a lot of lower black values. However, now you can go in and dial the nit value that you want to use for relative. No longer are you just selecting relative and getting an arbitrary value. You can now go in and target the value that you want to use. The program defaults itself to 0.5 nits if you just open it up and try to run the calibration. However, in a lot of testing that I've done, I find that 0.5 nits offer you a good tonal scaling, a good separation in the lower black values. However, it has a tendency to make the black look a little bit more muddy. It's not quite as dark, it's not quite as crisp as it can be. So with a lot of testing, I have landed at a value at 0.3 nits. 0.3 nits, as you're seeing right now, this is going to give you a much better black value compared to 0.5, and is still going to give you the tonal delineation, meaning that all these lower values, you can still see the difference between this 1, 2, and 3 and the 0 value behind it, which is pretty much the background. So you're still going to get a really great black tonal scaling. A few things to note about going in and choosing nit value for the black point is that when you run the display validation, you'll never land at the value that you have set at exactly. For example, setting this calibration to 0.3 nits for the black, I end up with 0.17 for the black. You can certainly go in and run the calibration again. That black value is going to change. However, as long as it is close to the value that you have set it to, that's going to be fine. But every time you go in calibration, it's not ever such an exact science as we all think it is. And here is a comparison between absolute black, and you can see that I'm just only able to start to discern the tones. For example, like 8 and 9, you can tell them apart a little bit, with 11 and 12 being the better value, where I can start to really differentiate that against the background. And this is the reason why I recommend going in to dial the nits value instead, which is the equivalent of choosing relative. Now, with majority of the calibrations devices are out there from X-Rite and also from Calibrite, and this would also include the Spyder X. Using 0.3 nits is going to give you the most optimal black value and also best tonal differentiation at the lower level. If you have a Spyder 5 device, setting the black at 0.3 nits is going to crush many of the lower black levels. In my testing, I find that 0.5 is going to give you the best black tonal scaling and also the best black for that calibration device. If you have a Spyder 4, my recommendation would be the same, and that is to set at 0.5 nits for the black point. If you have any other device or you just want a good universal value, 0.3 nits is going to work best. Now let's have a look at the calibration result. This is the SW270C, and I've calibrated this display with Palette Master Element using the X-Rite i1 Display Pro Plus, or currently what's being sold on the market as the Calibrite ColorChecker Display Plus. I've calibrated this display using Panel Native as the RGB primary, and I set the luminance on this display at 80 nits. What you're looking at right now is the calibration that is done at 0.5 nits. We can see that I can differentiate the first row between 1 and 0, 2 and 0, and so on and so forth really well there. However, one issue that I have with 0.5 nits is that the 0, that absolute black there, have a tendency to look a little bit more muddier than I want to, and I know that I can get a much better black than this. So if I go in and choose 0.3 as the black point, you can see that the 0, that black, looks much crisper, looks much deeper, and that's exactly where I want to be. However, this still maintains that I can still differentiate 1, 2, and 3 from the 0 in the background. Even though 1 may be a little more difficult to differentiate, I can still differentiate it, which is the main key here. And now I'm going to show you absolute black. And in absolute black, we can see a clear big distinction there that the first row pretty much is really hard to tell them from the background. I can only start to differentiate these values from the background starting at number 10, 11, and 12, where it started to become faintly different than the absolute 0 on the black in the background. So if you're doing any type of low-key work, this is definitely not the black value that you want to use. Now I'm also going to show you Adobe RGB mode, which is pre-calibrated from the factory, and we can see a few things changing right then and there. That number 1 and 0, it's a little bit easier to see the distinction from the background, and this is set at default value. So when these come from the factory, the luminance for this preset color mode in Adobe RGB is around 160 candela, which is double the brightness that I have set. So when you go in and custom calibrate your display and you set it at a lower luminance value, that black level, it's still going to scale down as well, which will also make these numbers a little bit hard to tell apart at a lower value. However, I would use that compared to these preset color modes. The other thing about this I want to point out is that if you take a look at any of these lighter gray rows, you're going to notice that it has a slight green tint to it. And this is because this Adobe RGB mode is uncalibrated. Pretty much I've just turned it into this mode. So it hasn't been calibrated or fine-tuned to the computer output or anything like that at all. And the moment I jump back to 0.3 nits, you're going to see that the gray looks much more neutral, where it doesn't have that green or yellow tint on them anymore, like the factory preset mode. And this is another reason why you want to go in and do a custom calibration on your display. So I hope you find this helpful. Questions or comment below. Give this a like, subscribe, hit on the bell if you're new, and until next time, in art we trust.